Hey everybody, this is Russ Metro Game Core. Today we're going to do a mini PC review, but it's actually two reviews in one. First, we're going to take a look at the new Beelink GTi14. Now at face value, this looks like any other mini PC that you would find from Beelink. It's got a nice clean metal chassis that reminds me of a Mac Mini and also is running the latest Intel Core processor. It's got a couple other bells and whistles, but the real star of the show is that it works with the new Beelink docking station. This thing cost $159 and comes with a built-in 600-watt power supply as well. I think it's a great deal. And it interfaces directly with this mini PC, allowing you to add whatever desktop GPU you would like. So that's what I mean by a two-in-one video. We're going to review the GTi14 on its own as a mini PC, and then also what it's like to use it with a docking station and a desktop GPU. I had a lot of fun putting this video together. It took me weeks of testing to really wrap my head around it, and I'm happy to share the results with you now. And so without any further delay, let's go ahead and dive in. Okay, let's go ahead and get started with the specs. For the processor, it's the Intel Core Ultra 9 185H. I've already used this in a mini PC review, and it's basically the top-of-the-line spec within the Ultra Core line. And this has integrated Intel Arc graphics. As far as storage, we've got two M.2 2280 slots, and one of them will be filled with a 1TB drive. And we've got two slots for DDR5 RAM with a max speed of 5600 megatransfers per second. We'll go over some of the I/O features when we actually look at the device itself, but I did want to mention that it has Wi-Fi 7 and Bluetooth 5.4, and one of the other features that I really like about this device is that the power supply is internal, which means that you only need a single cable to plug it in. And this is a very rare thing when it comes to mini PCs, so I like the fact that it's a lot more portable than others. The power button also features a fingerprint sensor, which will make it easier to log in, and this is also the first mini PC that I've tested that promotes having built-in speakers so that you don't have to use external ones, and we'll test this as well. Now in terms of price, this is not a cheap mini PC. In fact, it's one of the more expensive that I've ever tested. On the website, it's $919 right now, and if you go directly on Amazon, it's also listed there for about $900. And sadly, it just seems that that's the price tag for this specific chipset. If we look at other options available on Amazon, including the Minis Forum X7 Ti, which I reviewed previously, that one is also a very similar price. It's $850. And bear in mind, that's the cheapest I could find with this chipset. In fact, there's an Asus model, the NUC 14 Pro Plus, that's about $100 more. So I wanted to get this out of the way right off the bat, that this is an expensive PC. In fact, for $920, you can get a lot of computer. But looking at comparable prices, I don't think it's a Beelink problem, but rather an Intel problem. As we'll discuss later, I think that if they had used an AMD CPU with this exact same docking functionality, it would have been much better and cheaper. Either way, let's start the unboxing, and this was sent over from Beelink for review. As always, all opinions are my own. They're not seeing this ahead of time, and no money was exchanged in any way. Inside the box, it's pretty standard stuff, so we've got an instruction manual that'll walk you through how to tear apart the device and things like that. And really, other than that, it is pretty bare bones. Like I mentioned before, the power supply is internal, so it'll just come with a single power cord. Other than that, we've got an HDMI cable, and that is it. Now, looking at the mini PC itself, like I mentioned in the intro, it does remind me a lot of a Mac Mini. And my first impression was that, yeah, it's a little bit heftier and larger than you would expect from a mini PC, but again, it has that internal power supply. To give you an idea of just how big it is, let's compare it against an 8-ounce stick of Kerrygold butter. And I would say it's about 3.5 sticks of Kerrygold butter, maybe a little bit more, so about 30 ounces of butter altogether. Now, if you want more precise measurements, they always have that stuff on their website, but I think maybe a more practical use would be an Xbox controller. And you can see it's about the exact same width as my Xbox Series controller, but obviously a bit taller as well. So I would definitely still consider this to be a mini PC, but it is a little bit on the large side compared to others. But I think it's a worthy sacrifice because I found this to be a lot more portable than other mini PCs because I just have to grab the cable and the computer itself and then take it with me back and forth. So let's take a look at the I/O, and we'll start with the front. Now the first thing you might notice are these 4 small holes here at the top. And these are supposed to be used as microphone holes. According to Beelink, you could use this for like conference calls, for example. Below that, we've got a USB 3.2 port that's going to be capable of 10 gigabits per second. Then we have an SD card slot as well as a USB-C port, again capable of 10 gigabits per second. After that, we've got a 3.5mm headphone jack, a power LED, and then finally our fingerprint sensor power button. And that's about it when it comes to the front. I'm not a huge fan of these microphone holes. I think it makes the device look just a little bit more utilitarian than I would like. Now on the left and right, we don't have any I/O, so it's a nice clean design. So let's go ahead and move to the back and take a look at what we have here. On the far left, we've got our power port, then a microphone headphone jack, and then above that, we've got a Thunderbolt 4 port capable of 40 gigabits per second. Next, we've got HDMI with 4K 60 Hz, and then a DisplayPort 1.4 alpha. That's going to give us 4K and 144 Hz. To the right of that, we've got two Ethernet ports, both capable of 2.5 gigabit, and then above that, as well as to the right of that, we've got 4 additional USB-A 3.2 ports. Other than that, you can see that we have a heatsink and exhaust vent at the top, and that's about it when it comes to I/O around the sides. Now on the bottom, you can see the ventilation intake and then also 4 different screw holes. These are each covered by rubber tabs, and I think it's a great opportunity to do a teardown right now. So first thing, you'll have to get some tweezers and pull those out, and then just 4 Phillips head screws to get the bottom cover off. And this is what it'll look like directly underneath. They actually have a dust cover here. They've been doing this for a couple PCs now, and I really like it. And you can also see the 2 speakers right here, and of note, they are downward firing. In fact, let's remove the 3 screws that are holding on the dust filter so we can get a better look at them inside. And so here's a better look at them. Let's go ahead and start now with a sound test. So for this, I'm going to put the microphone about 1.5 feet away from the computer itself, and I'm going to run it at 75% volume. Now hopefully this is coming through, but you can probably hear that when it comes to music, it is sounding pretty muffled. I'm not sure if this was a smart move to have speakers facing downward directly into the surface of your desk. And so just in listening to something like the Hades theme song, I can totally hear all those reverberations, and it doesn't sound very pleasant to me. It's definitely better than having no speakers at all, but it's really only something that I would use when I'm in a pinch and don't have access to anything else. Now the big issue came for me when I tried to use it with dialogue. For example, listening to this really great YouTuber right here, all of the audio sounded really muffled and a little bit distorted, even at 75% volume. That is almost unplayably small. In this video, we're going to focus on those smaller handhelds, not necessarily because they're better than the others, but because they're more pocketable and portable. And I've always found that the easier a device is to take around, the more likely I'm going to grab it, and the more likely I'm going to play it as well. And so again, unless I was in dire straits and I didn't have like headphones to plug it into or any external speakers, I don't think that I would be using this much at all. So I appreciate the fact that they tried to put in audio with a mini PC. This is something that is rarely done, but unfortunately the execution here isn't very impressive. Now when I get one of these mini PCs, one of the first things I like to do is tear it down as much as possible to have a look at the RAM and the SSD and see how easy it is to upgrade them. So we're going to keep going down this rabbit hole to see how far it takes in terms of work to get to that point. Next thing we need to do is remove the actual speaker compartment. Here's a better look at it right here. It's connected by a single ribbon cable, so you have to be careful when taking this out. And unfortunately, Beelink doesn't have any specs about these speakers themselves, so I'm not sure how many watts they are, but you can see that the housing is, in general, pretty small. Now, after removing the speakers, we now have to take out the power supply because everything is underneath this. And everything here is just attached with Phillips head screws, so it's pretty easy to get to all of them. It's just a pain in the butt that you have to do this in the first place. Now, I'm not going to detach the power supply itself. I'm just going to kind of hold it off to the side and see if I can get inside without having to dismantle all of it. And after that, you can see there's another layer of metal bracing that we have to remove to get to everything else. Now, most of these screws are very easy to take off, except for one. It's this one here on the far left. And I'm not sure what these are called. I think they're like spacer screws or something like that. And unfortunately, you cannot get this off with your fingers alone. So it is going to require an additional tool. I had to use some needle nose pliers just to get it a little bit loose. In addition, there is adhesive rubber padding pressed against it, which makes it really hard to twist in the first place. Either way, after wrestling with it for a few minutes, I was able to get this spacer screw out, and this is what it looks like. I did have to damage it a little bit in getting it out, which is kind of annoying if you ask me. Anyway, after that, we are now finally able to get to the good stuff. So if you ever wanted to upgrade or change out your RAM or SSD, that's what you would have to go through. The RAM in my review unit is Crucial branded. You can see that it is 16 gigabytes and it is DDR5 5600 megatransfers per second. And looking at the SSD, it looks to be from Crucial as well, and it is 1 terabyte. And to the right of that in its housing, you can see the Wi-Fi module, and then above that is a 2280 slot. So if you wanted to expand the storage, you could add that here. But I gotta say that I'm personally a little bit annoyed that I had to do that much work just to expand the storage. Now, generally a mini PC is going to be a little bit more challenging to get inside of compared to like a full desktop PC, but this is definitely one of the more advanced teardowns that I've had to do for a very simple task like changing out the RAM and storage. So if you are looking for a very plug-and-play PC experience, yes, this can do that, but if you have to make any sort of changes to the RAM and the SSD, then I think you should probably just prepare yourself for the fact that it'll take a few minutes of work to get there in the first place. So it's really going to come down to how willing and able you are to actually break down a PC like this. The only other thing worth mentioning with the PC itself is going to be this other little rubber slide here at the top. And if you pull this flap off, this is going to give us that PCIe entrance that we're going to need for that docking station. Speaking of which, I think it's a great time to segue into this because they sent this at the same time as they sent the PC. This one also has an instruction manual very similar to what you would find with the mini PC, but a little bit more in-depth in terms of just plugging everything in. Inside the box, it will come with its own power cable, so all you need to do is bring your GPU into the mix. In addition, it comes with a GPU stabilizer, so when you put that on, you'll screw it into this. And we've also got another stabilizer for the mini PC itself once we slot it into place. Now this dock also has an M.2 drive inside. We'll take a look in a second, and we have two different options we can use. By default, the slot is going to be for storage, but if you would like, you can actually change it out for an external Wi-Fi module. And this will work nicely if you have external antenna mounts as well, because it has those attachments too. Other than that, we've got screws for the GPU stabilizer, and then finally we've got a power cable. Again, all the internal power supply is within. And so this is what the dock looks like. It kind of has a stair-step design to it. It's very sturdy feeling. It has a metal plate at the bottom, and then everything else is kind of a hard plastic. Let's take a quick look at the I/O. So on the far left, we've got our two power cables for the GPU itself, and then it also does have a USB 2.0 interface if you want to use this as well. After that, we've got those two external antenna mounts like I mentioned before, and then of course we've got that PCIe slot for your desktop GPU. Further down, we also have power hookups. If you wanted to add an external fan somewhere between the mini PC and the GPU, you could use that. And then finally, taking up the other half of that docking station is that PCIe interface slot. And so the idea here is that you'll take your mini PC and you'll slot it directly into place, and it'll connect with that PCIe card. And really, that's it when it comes to interfacing with the GPU once you have it plugged in. The only wires that you will see will be the power cables going to the power supply. And then finally, on the left side, you can see these are the mounts for that GPU stabilizer, and then this is where we would also plug in that cable. Now, taking off that bottom metal plate, you will see that we have that M.2 drive I was mentioning before. So here you'll be able to add another 2280 external storage stick. This will be great if you have specific games you want to play only with an external GPU. And then, like I mentioned before, it also comes with that M.2 mount for an external Wi-Fi as well. Personally, I found that the Wi-Fi on board the machine works just fine, and so I haven't had any issues or need to actually expand that. So let's go ahead and try to put all this together to see what it looks like. I'm going to use my trusty 3060 Ti. I bought this about a year and a half ago for like $350 bucks. And hooking this into the dock is super simple. You just have to kind of slot it into the PCIe spot, and then from there we got to get that GPU bracer and then screw everything in. After that, we just need to use the two supplied power cables and then run them from the GPU into the docking station. The cables themselves are a little bit longer than I would need, but I think that because we have varying sizes of GPU, this is probably fine. And really, that's all it takes when it comes to setting up this GPU. I've never seen a cleaner or easier setup process before. And then of course, hooking up the PC is also nice and simple. All I have to do is just slot it into place. And then I'll grab the mini PC bracer, screw that one in, and now we are good to go. So that's it. It's about a 2-minute install, and I think it is a really easy process and kind of fun to do. And easily one of my favorite things about this whole setup is that there are no external power supplies. So all you really need are just two different cables, one for the mini PC and then one for the external dock. Everything else is taken care of. And so even though the entire setup isn't what I would call mini, we are after all working with a desktop GPU, it's still the smallest that I've ever seen. And personally, I like these open air kind of setups. I just like the idea of seeing all the GPU fans spinning around. It also helps a lot with cooling because nothing is enclosed inside of a case other than obviously the mini PC itself. From there is a power button on the docking station. You have to turn that one on first and then turn on the mini PC and everything will connect immediately. And here's a quick look at the overall setup on the back. The mini PC has the power cable as well as the Ethernet port, and then also I've got my mouse and keyboard with USB dongles. And then to the left of that, all I have is the HDMI port going into the GPU, and then obviously the docking station is powered up as well. And so I think that overall this is a pretty clean look considering the fact that this is about as powerful as a desktop PC. Over on the front port, I've got another USB dongle used for my USB controller, and that's about it. And I think that when you put this all together, it's one of the cleanest looks I've seen with an external GPU setup like this. And I also appreciate the fact that upgrading with a different GPU would be plug and play. I've heard people using this with a 4090, so there's a lot of room to work with. But I think before we start talking about the performance when it comes to all of this put together, we should go back and talk about the mini PC itself and see how it performs on its own. After all, if the base mini PC cost $900 to start with, that's already a high asking price. So let's see what we get out of that. Let's do a couple benchmarks first. We're going to start with Cinebench and then also run Core Temp at the same time. So here I'm going to look at the overall power draw as well as the highest temperature, and then also we'll take a look at the Cinebench score after the 10-minute test. Now this is a very CPU intensive test, so what I'm really looking for here is maxing out all of the cores and seeing how they perform. And you can see that at a 100% load, we're getting a power rating of about 54 watts from the CPU. In addition, the temperatures are staying relatively low, especially when it comes to a mini PC. So as the test is running, I found that somewhere between 70 and 75 degrees seems to be the stable temperature at this 54 watts. There are a couple spikes here and there, upwards of like 84 degrees Celsius, but nothing really crazy. In fact, if we look at the final score and we look at the max column, you can see that 3 of the temperatures did get 84 degrees or higher. One of them got to 88 degrees, but even then I'm not totally worried about it. The TJ max on this computer is 110 degrees Celsius. That means that you can go all the way up to that before it's going to start throttling. And based on this 10-minute test of maxing out the CPUs to 100% the entire time, we got nowhere close to that. And then finally, as the last part of this test, I did want to make note of the score, which is 11,930. That is above average compared to other APUs that I've tested before. Generally, if something gets 9,000 points or above, that means it's going to be good when it comes to video editing. And I've used this CPU before for that task, and it does do very well. It's also worth noting that the cooling on this is kind of incredible. In fact, I don't really have any testing to demonstrate because the fan was so low that I never really heard it get above just the ambient noise in the room. And so if you are looking for a very quiet mini PC, even under a heavy load, I think this one fits the bill nicely. Okay, so that's it when it comes to CPU testing. Let's move on and do some GPU testing next. For this, we're going to use 3D Mark's Time Spy. This is the standard test that I like to use in all these mini PCs. And you can see that the results here are also pretty darn good. In fact, anything above 3000 is usually what I'm shooting for. And this one got 3800 with no sweat. So when it comes to APUs, this is pretty darn good. With this score, I would expect a computer like this with integrated graphics should be able to play most PC games up to 1080p with a little bit of work in terms of the settings. So let's go ahead and move into actual game testing with the mini PC by itself. As always, we're going to start with the lightweight games and then work our way up. And in general, I'm going to use a 1080p resolution in all of my testing. When it comes to lightweight games, indies and stuff like that, absolutely no problem. This is going to play just fine. Now, as we start moving up to more intensive games like Hades, it still runs really well, 1080p default settings and about an average of 120 frames per second. Same thing with Whisker Squadron Survivor, which is actually a pretty heavyweight game all things considered, so 1080p medium settings, about 80 frames per second. Another slightly more intensive indie style game is going to be Art of Rally, 1080p medium settings and well over 60 frames per second here too. Now, moving into what I like to call the Xbox 360 era, this is going to be things like BioShock Infinite as well as Halo Reach. Each of these do really well at 1080p high settings with BioShock Infinite as well as 1080p original settings with Halo Reach, and they both are playing at a stable 60 frames per second. Not only that, the GPU is nowhere near getting maxed out, so this is going to be a very stable experience. Moving on to former AAA titles like Doom Eternal, this one is 1080p medium settings, and yeah, again, over 60 frames per second. This is definitely pushing the CPU up to 54 watts, but it's still running really well. Another game that ran pretty well is going to be Control, 1080p low settings, and I found for the most part it's somewhere between like 50 and 55 frames per second, except for when you're making a lot of things happen. So when I start to move like my telekinetic stuff and really start wrecking things, then it can dip down to like 35-40 frames per second. So this is definitely hitting a bottleneck in terms of GPU performance, but I would still say this is relatively playable. And that's really going to be the story for a lot of these games as they start to get harder and harder to run. Let's look at Marvel Spider-Man, this one at 1080p low settings, but with FSR 3 enabled. That's going to lower the rendering resolution to make it a little bit easier, and you can see here that we're getting about 35 frames per second on average. In this kind of scenario, I would probably just cap it at 30 to make sure that everything stays stable. Same thing with Cyberpunk 2077, I had to fiddle around with the settings to find something that worked for me. And with this game, I found that 1080p low settings and then turning on the Intel XeSS actually did the trick. That would give me a frame rate that was pretty stably above 30 frames per second, while still looking really good on the screen. And so again, this is just another example of when I would probably just cap it at 30 frames per second and enjoy it as is. Next up we have Horizon Zero Dawn, 1080p low settings, and I did have to turn on FSR to get a pretty stable frame rate. And here I found an average between 45 and 50 frames per second. I thought that was pretty good, although the graphics did get quite murky in this game. One game I found particularly demanding was Last of Us Part 1. Even in the beginning scenes, I had to drop it down to a 720p resolution. And when you combine that with low settings just to keep it above 30 frames per second, this was pretty murky. It almost felt like playing it on the PS3. And so I think this is the kind of PC gaming performance that you can expect out of the box with this device. You can probably start by setting most games at a 1080p resolution and then adjusting the graphical fidelity and then messing around with like FSR and XeSS to see what works the best. And with those type of settings, I would expect with the heavy-hitting games to get somewhere around above 30 frames per second. Personally, I found that when it comes to using just the mini PC alone without any sort of external GPU, the performance is about what I was expecting from this chipset. That means that sure, it's going to be great for indie games, maybe even up to 4K like this game. But when it comes to more modern PC titles, it's really not going to be able to carry a lot of weight. Let's look at Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. This one I had to play at 720p low settings and then also turn on FSR just to get it to play pretty well. The frame rate here was pretty good, over 40 frames per second, but man, it does look pretty raunchy. And for me personally, these kind of graphics for a computer that costs about $900 is pretty crazy. I could build my own PC with external graphics and get something a lot better. Now, combining this with the docking station and my 3060 Ti is quite a stark difference. With the exact same game, you can see I'm now playing it at 4K with medium settings, and yes, I turned on DLSS, but I'm getting a pretty stable 60 frames per second. It does dip down every once in a while, but I would say this is a much more playable and beautiful experience. So now let's take a look at what kind of improvements we can get when actually combining it with the docking station and my graphics card. As a quick reminder, my time splice score with the computer alone was 3842. Now, if we combine that with the external GPU, you can see that the score is about 2.5 times better. The graphics score went way up, over 3 times better, but the CPU score actually dipped down a bit. I'm not really sure what's going on there. Either way, you can see that from a gaming perspective, this will give you a lot better settings by having its own dedicated graphics card. So let's go over a couple of those other games that we tried out before, but maxing out the settings as much as we can. We'll start with Doom Eternal. So this time I'm running it at 4K in ultra settings, and I'm getting an average frame rate about 90 to 100 frames per second. And with Control at 1440p in high settings, the exact same scene gets us almost 60 frames per second. It does dip down every once in a while too, but still, this is a very stable and nice looking experience. I'm also going to test out a couple games that I didn't do previously. So for example, with Destiny 2, I'm running it at 4K in medium settings and getting an average frame rate about 80 to 85 frames per second. This one doesn't work well with the metrics that I like to show on the screen, so I have to use the NVIDIA one, so it's a little bit harder to read. For God of War, I set it to 4K high settings and then also did turn on DLSS at the quality setting. That essentially means that it's going to be rendering at 1440p instead of 4K, but it's still looking really good. And it's also running an average of 60 frames per second with a couple dips down to like 55 here and there. Moving over to Last of Us Part 1, this time I'm playing it at 1440p and medium settings, and again, a pretty stable 60 frames per second. I would see a little bit of hitching here or there, and this is after the shaders have compiled as well. So not a perfect experience, but still a lot better than it was when trying to play it with the mini PC alone. Spider-Man is also a similar story, so 4K medium settings, I turned on the DLSS, which means that it is going to drop it down to a 1440p rendering, and again, we're getting somewhere between 55 and 60 frames per second. Again, a much better looking and playing experience. Moving on, we have Baldur's Gate 3, 4K medium settings, and I turned on DLSS for this one as well. I found that when playing a game at 4K and then turning on a super scaler like DLSS does really work pretty well. Again, this one is not a totally stable 60 frames per second, but still somewhere between 55 and 60, a very playable experience. Same thing with Cyberpunk 2077, but this time around I found that the best settings were just straight 1440p high settings. And then finally, the last PC game that I tested was Red Dead Redemption 2, 1440p with the quality settings and well above 60 frames per second the entire time. And this is about the performance that I would expect from the 3060 Ti in the first place, so I think everything is working as intended. Now, PC gaming is really only half the puzzle for me. I do enjoy testing out emulation as well. So we're going to start with Gen 6 systems and work our way up just to make sure that we can cover all our bases. We're going to start with GameCube emulation using the Dolphin emulator. I'm going to start it at a 4x resolution, which is somewhere between 1440p, but not quite 4K. And for the most part, I found that many games played absolutely fine at this high of an upscale. In fact, I found some games that just ran a lot better than that. For example, NBA Street Volume 3 ran at a 6x resolution and a very stable 60. Same thing with SSX Tricky at a 6x resolution, which is well above 4K. I would get some dips here and there, depending on if there were a lot of snowboarders in the same scene as me, but overall, yeah, really good emulation performance here too. Now, it wasn't perfect with GameCube. I did have to dial it down every once in a while. For example, the harder hitting games like Beyond Beyond Good and Evil, this one I had to play at a 3x resolution. That's going to be a little bit higher than 1080p, but below 1440p. I think it still looks great. It was a similar story with Rogue Squadron 2. This one also played the best at a 3x resolution. Moving on to Nintendo Wii using the exact same Dolphin emulator, this one I just set at 4x resolution and every game played well. That included some of the easier to run games like Sonic Colors as well as Muramasa, but even Tatsunoko vs. Capcom, one of the harder games to actually emulate correctly, this did pretty well at a 4x resolution. When using some of those really heavy-hitting super moves, it would glitch out a little bit and drop down every once in a while, but overall I would say this is still very playable. Now my PlayStation 2 methodology was also very similar. I just set it to a 4x resolution, again somewhere between 1440p and 4K, and then just tried out every game I could. And I mostly focused on the harder to play games, and I found that really just going forward, every single one of these games played well. So I would say that this is going to be more than capable when it comes to playing 1440p emulation with Generation 6 systems, particularly GameCube and PS2. Even the harder to run games, God of War 2 is often really hard to emulate. This one did just fine. Same thing with Sly Cooper. This one played at a 4x resolution, no problem. The only game I had to turn down the resolution for was Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance 2. This one is kind of similar to Champions and Norwrath in that it's really hard to play, and it's running at 3x resolution, at least in the intro scenes. This game does get harder to emulate in some of the later scenes in the game, but overall I would say this is still going to be playable. You'll just have to adjust the resolution. Now unfortunately the other Generation 6 system, the original Xbox, does not fare as well. The only game I got to be relatively playable was Dead or Alive 3. In fact, this game was pretty good at a 2x resolution. Other than some slowdowns here and there, I would say this was playable. However, basically everything else I tried was not great. Let's start with NBA 2K7. This one I had to drop down to a native resolution, and even then, while in the gameplay it wasn't at full speed. It was pretty close. But the problem with this game and some other sports games is they often will jump into instant replays, and those will bog the system down. So even though some of the gameplay is playable, the overall experience is kind of atrocious. Other games just will not play at full speed. Soul Calibur 2 is a great example. This one played almost at half speed. It was kind of bad. And another game that's always really hard to emulate is going to be Project Gotham Racing, again playing at about half speed, so not very good at all. So I would say in a nutshell, I wouldn't consider the original Xbox to be playable with this chipset. Let's move on to PS3 emulation, so up one generation using RPCS3 at a native resolution. And I was surprised at the results here. In fact, this played probably a little bit better than I was expecting, especially after testing the original Xbox. I found that some of the more lightweight games played fine all the way up to Demon's Souls, but even those harder to emulate games like Ratchet & Clank Quest for Booty, this one stayed well above 30 frames per second the whole time. So this was a clean and smooth experience, all things considered. Prince of Persia is another one of those open world 3D games that are kind of hard to emulate. But here I turned off the frame limit so it would go over 30 frames per second, and it was more consistently closer to 60 than 30. And so I think that's a great sign to be able to play this game with a smooth gameplay experience. Now from here on out, I also peppered in a little bit of that docked footage to see what it would be like if you used an external GPU. So here with the same game, I'm now running it at a 3x resolution, which is going to be 4K. And here you can see that it's hovering around 30 frames per second, which is what the game originally played at on the PS3. So this will give you a very similar to original experience, but with, a 3x upscale, which looks beautiful. Here's another example just using the main mini PC. We're running Infamous, one of the hardest to run games on the PS3. And this one you can see that at a native resolution, it is actually staying above 30 frames per second. So this is pretty good. And jumping back over into the docked experience, again with a 3x resolution, so 4K, and this one is also hovering around 30 frames per second. It would dip down to like 29 or 28 frames every once in a while, but I would still say this is a very playable experience. But I think if I was to play through this game, I would probably just drop it down to a 2x resolution, which will be closer to 1440p, and just enjoy it like that with a higher frame rate. And then finally, let's talk a little bit about Xbox 360. We're going to jump back and forth between the mini PC and then using it docked. So to start, here is Vanquish, and you can see that this is just completely unplayable. We're getting an average about 15-20 frames per second. It is terrible. In fact, that's just kind of par for the course when it comes to Xbox 360 games. Even Forza Horizon is just absolutely unplayable. I saw frame rates of like 6 frames per second. Now plugging this into an external GPU fixes all those problems, and so we can play this very stably even with an upscale up to 1080p. So my conclusion when it comes to Xbox 360 is the same as it was with this chipset on a previous mini PC, in that it's basically unplayable. Maybe we'll see some compatibility fixes between the Intel chipsets and this emulator in the future, but as it stands right now, the only way to really enjoy Xbox 360 with this particular chip is to use it with an external GPU. Because otherwise it's really painful to try to play Xbox 360 on this system, and so I wouldn't even try it. Okay, so that was a lot of testing. We kind of went through it quickly, but that took me several days of trying out different settings and configurations. So let's move on and start to summarize the experience and what I like and what I don't like about this Beelink PC. And the first thing I want to really just give props to is that I think it is an excellent concept. Earlier this year, they had what they called a creative contest where they asked people to give them designs for how to set up a mini PC with an eGPU. And it feels like this PC is the culmination of all those submissions, and I think it's pretty awesome. I think that having a mini PC that is just fine on its own and then being able to plug it into an external dock if you want to expand it more just makes that mini PC a little bit more of a viable solution. I think there were also some other pretty good designs here as well. We've got an internal power supply, which I think is just super handy when it comes to portability. And I also think they did a good job when it comes to having plenty of I/O. In particular, having that SD card slot in the front is a great move because it makes it super easy for things like video editing. I also was surprised to see just how quiet and cool this device ran as well, even when pushing it at a max load. And the performance of the mini PC on its own was decent. I wouldn't say it was outstanding, and I wouldn't even say that it was great for its price point. But you could play most games at 1080p with maybe a bit of FSR and around 30 frames per second, and I think that is a pretty enjoyable experience. Whether or not that's worth the price point is going to come in the next section. And then finally, I do appreciate that the eGPU dock setup on its own was implemented well. I think that hooking up the mini PC to the dock itself and then adding the GPU is like a 2-minute setup process, and it looks very clean. And so there are some elements to the GTi14 that need to be applauded because I think they did a good job. But when taking it as a whole, you know there's going to be some negatives, so let's talk about those. And I think number one just has to be that high base price. This is a very expensive mini PC for what you're getting. To put it into context, I've reviewed over 40 of these on my channel. I've got them all listed in a big old spreadsheet. I'll have it linked down below. And these are all sorted by price from low to high, and you can see that the Beelink GTi14 is the most expensive mini PC on this list that does not have discrete graphics. In other words, every other mini PC that I've tested has been cheaper than this one. And performance-wise, if we look at another Beelink mini PC like the SER8, which is my top pick around the $650 price point, this one gives the same or better performance in each category, and it's about $250 cheaper. So if we are just talking about getting a mini PC on its own, and even if we're only focusing on those from Beelink, I think there are better options out there. But even if we take the price out of it, there are plenty of other things that I wish were better. For example, just tearing down this device to get to the RAM and the SSD kind of sucks. I personally enjoy taking things apart and putting them back together, but I don't think that every PC owner should have that level of skill. And the fact that it's that finicky to just get inside to be able to upgrade your storage is a bad sign. Also, even though I like the fact that we have speakers on this device, the quality and the implementation of them were not very good. These are speakers that I would probably only use in an emergency. Other times I would probably just rather use headphones. And even though the performance was relatively decent all things considered, there were some parts that were just completely bad. When it came to original Xbox and Xbox 360 emulation in particular, it was basically unplayable. And then finally, I just can't let go of how expensive this device is. If I had $900 to spend, there are so many other options out there. You could obviously build your own desktop PC that'll be bigger. You can also get a laptop. You could get any other non-Intel PC that might do better as well. So when it comes down to it, I have a very hard time recommending the GTi14 on its own. If we're only looking at the base price and what we can get for it, I just don't really see it being a good recommendation at all. However, I really do love the fact that we have the ability to dock it so seamlessly into this docking station, which I think is definitely worth $160. And going forward, I would love to see this in every Beelink mini PC, to have that PCIe slot. If they can combine that with a mini PC that I can actually easily recommend, I think it would be an excellent combo. Imagine spending $500 or $600 for one of the better Ryzen CPUs and then having some pretty excellent performance there. And then in a couple years, when you're ready to upgrade, you could just slot it into a docking station like this and then get a GPU and you're good to go. And I think that's really where the future lies when it comes to mini PCs like this. Make them good as they are, but then also make them upgradable. But sadly, if I was looking at the tea leaves, I don't think that the GTi14 is going to be a big seller. I just don't think that there is much of an appetite for these rather expensive Intel Core Ultra CPUs. But at the very least, I hope that Beelink just kind of moves forward from this and continues to use their docking station with other mini PCs, because that's the goal in this whole review. If we can get more docking station compatible mini PCs, I think they're going to have a big hit. Anyway, that's really going to be about it for this video. I was kind of conflicted about this one, and I think that's why it took me so long to do all of this testing. It's not often where we get a mini PC that I can't recommend that has a setup that I want to see more of. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. If you're in the market for a mini PC, what do you think about this docking station in particular? I think it's pretty awesome. As always, thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.